Welcome. My name is Stephen Collins. I'm the CEO of Matter. Today we have one of our signature programs called Tales from the Trenches, where we talk with seasoned entrepreneurs about their journey. How did they get started? What are they trying to accomplish? What have they learned along the way? Our guest today is Matt Omernick, who is the co-founder and chief creative officer of Akili Interactive, which is developing FDA-approved digital therapeutics to treat behavioral health conditions. Akili was just awarded FDA clearance for EndeavorRx, the first and only prescription treatment delivered through a video game developed to treat children with ADHD. I'm not, after being in this for a number of years, I'm still not sure if there is a typical healthcare entrepreneur archetype, but if there is one, Matt is not it. His background is in games and entertainment. He held senior roles at LucasArts and Microsoft and DreamWorks and Electronic Arts. He teaches college level computer graphics courses. He wrote a book called Creating the Art of the Game, which has become an industry standard. I met Matt when we were on a panel together last year at the Health Conference and really enjoyed his perspective on digital therapeutics and the healthcare industry generally, and I'm really looking forward to his insights today. We produce Tales from the Trenches with VillageMD, which is a Chicago-based company innovating in value-based care. They're operating in 10 markets, and they work with physician practices to implement really true value-based care models. You may have seen recently, they received a $1 billion investment from Walgreens to scale their operations. And I did say $1 billion, so it will be really interesting to see where that takes them. Our moderator today will be Mike Roberts. He is the Chief Technology Officer at VillageMD. Mike joined the company in 2016, and he and his team are really at the heart of enabling the VillageMD's value-based care solutions and allowing the company to scale. If you have questions for Matt, use the chat function within Zoom, and Mike will incorporate those into the program. And lastly, for those of you who signed up for the post-event networking, you will get an email in a few minutes from Kay Nishkars in a few minutes that will include a separate link to click on at the conclusion of the main program. We have not found a more elegant way to do it, so bear with us. Look for the email from Kay. When the program's over, click on that link and it'll take you into the networking forum. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike to lead this conversation.
Great, thanks Stephen, and thanks for allowing me to host today. Matt, as I've gotten to know you a little bit over the course of the last few days, I couldn't be more excited to be spending the next hour or so with you. The level of energy that you bring in conversation, I think will translate well here virtually for the group that has joined us, and I look forward to our conversation. So thanks for making the time today.
Likewise, and thanks Stephen for the you made me sound way cooler than I really am. But yeah, circuitous route into healthcare for sure. So I'm happy to talk about it and take any questions that are useful today.
Awesome. Well, let's rewind the clock then. Let's back up to the early days. I think you do have a creative and a tremendously diverse background as it relates to how you stumbled into healthcare. But before we get there, let's go back to where it all started. You went to college, as I understand, in Florida, and then you were looking for your first job, and you sort of had a bit of a challenge once you were on your way to that job. Can you describe what that was like?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I went to a private art school in Sarasota, Florida called the Ringling College of Art and Design's. Amazing school. And I went there because at the time, it was the only school in the world at that point that I could find that taught computer animation. And so I think I was lucky, like early, I just knew that's what I wanted to do. I'd always been an artist growing up. And I think once I'd seen the music video by Dire Straits, Money for Nothing, if anybody ever remembers that, that was one of the early computer animation. And I was just like blown away and hooked. I'm like, I need to do that thing. And so Ringling, the school in Sarasota, was the place that I could learn this. So I chased that down. And when I graduated, I had a verbal offer for a job in Chicago. So I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Wisconsin, in central Wisconsin. And so eager to get back and be close to family and love Chicago. And So packed up a U-Haul van and drove up there on this verbal offer, and get there to find out the job wasn't real. That it was not an option. So here I am after college. All right, what do I do? So jumped into a job as a waiter at an Italian restaurant in North Wells Street, and just started looking everywhere. And this is before the internet really, you couldn't really look for jobs on the internet, right? So I had the big old yellow pages, and I'm going through and I'm finding anything that I could find that was remotely related to film or games or television, and found a few places, and I just continued to knock on their door. And there was one place in particular in Chicago called Atomic Imaging, which is still going strong, run by Ari Golan. And so he gave me a great break to work on some film titles and medical animations. And then I started knocking on the door of a game studio. And it was at the time called Glass Interactive. And Glass was a toy maker. And they had a video game division where they worked on the Hasbro licenses. And I was really eager to work on games that I grew up with loving, like Axis and Allies and Diplomacy and some of these old board games, and translating those into games. So long story short, that's how I got kind of involved in both kind of the film side and the game side, was in Chicago. And I was just moonlighting there and working nights and weekends at Atomic Imaging. And I just kept going to Glass Interactive every day until they hired me. And so that's kind of got a foothold in Chicago, and spent some time there before I eventually moved to California. So I'll pause there. That was the short version.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think, what it highlights to me is sort of clearly a bit of a tenacious approach. And I think, as many entrepreneurs can appreciate, if you don't have a tenacious approach, and sometimes, don't take no for an answer, ever, and just sort of keep pressing, it sort of clearly leads you to success. But that's really hard too. It can be challenging. It can be at times demoralizing. Maybe just describe a little bit about maybe some of those challenges that you had as you were going through that process of going every day to the same place until you're able to actually get a job. What did that look like?
Yeah, certainly frustrating. As a college student, of course, you have these grand visions of how it's going to go when you graduate. And for us back then, like, you would have a demo reel, and the only way to get that out there was to buy these really cheap VHS tapes that only had about 2 minutes of reel on them, because they were cheaper. And that's about all you needed. So I remember just sitting in the lab and recording, 100 of those. And then, as a poor college student, you're licking stamps and you're mailing these out to places, right? But I've never forget this, like, oh my gosh, I'm so proud of my demo reel, and I'm going to send this thing out to 100 places, and 98 of them are going to offer me a job, right? And then it's crickets, like absolutely nothing at all. And I'm like, oh no, this is terrible. But you're right. It's like you kind of have to, I think that's where your body kicks in that perseverance, and you're like, okay, well then maybe taking the same path that everybody else is taking by just sending out demo reels isn't the right way to do this, right? So I found myself starting to naturally fall into this way of thinking. It's like, okay, well, what is the path everybody else takes? I'm going to take a different one, right? I'm going to find a different way to get there. And that has, over time, now that I look back at myself and my career, that's something that I think I just kind of naturally am attracted to doing, is finding those alternate paths. And I find there's always another path. There's always another 3 paths, and you just have to be kind of open-minded and go after them and look for them. So yeah. It's kind of a small analogy of a bigger picture item there.
Yeah. So much of it depends on, at least what I found, and I think you agree, Matt, with where you find your passion and how you identify that passion. And so as you sort of transition from the Midwest to the West Coast in terms of your sort of next sets of things that are incredible in their own right, I can't wait to talk to them. But maybe talk about, like, how do you layer in passion in sort of all of these points and times that you're making decisions? Like is that a North Star for you, or how do you think about leveraging your passion as you are successful as an entrepreneur?
Sure. I mean, I'm the first to recognize that I feel very fortunate to have kind of known what I was passionate about, and to live during a time where that thing that I'm passionate about exists. In this case, it's art and computers and technology mixed together. And so I'm always have been reminding myself of just being grateful and feeling fortunate for having that passion for something and it being an option, right? Because that's not always true. It's just not always true. Most of the time I think you can make it true, but so yeah, I think that's been a huge part of just who I am, and my choices that I've made along my path and career have been more passion driven, because it's paid off for me more often than not, right? So it's now my natural instinct to just follow that. And so you hear it a million ways: follow your gut, follow your heart, follow your passion, right? It's the same idea. I guess it's this like giant collection of data that you're gathering that you don't really know you're gathering, and it just manifests as a gut feeling, right? But if you're, I tell this to my kids, my young girls all the time, right? You can do anything that you put your mind to, but pick one that you love, right? Find something that you really love. And so I mean, the short answer to that one is absolutely. I'm a massive fan of following that gut and following that passion, because it generally works.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're moving from Chicago out west. You have some pretty amazing opportunities that you had in front of you that you took advantage of and continue to build upon. Just tell our audience about what some of those experiences were like working on such prolific, especially during the early 2000s, sort of, over the course of the decade. What did that look like working in a gaming industry that was booming and really moving from, sort of single platform, not online, to multi-platform online, and you found yourself right at the center of it. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. Fascinating, exciting, amazing, and exhausting. It's the other part that I'll talk about. So early or I think it was year 2000. I think is when I moved out to the West Coast, and I initially did what was my first startup there, which was not specifically games, but a little bit more gamification and some tech, and it was really, really exciting. And I got bit by the startup bug at that point in time, but shortly after, I got an offer from DreamWorks Interactive to come and work for that division in Los Angeles, which I just could not turn down. It was an amazing opportunity to work on the franchise called Medal of Honor, which is really the genre establishing IP that led to Call of Duty and a lot of these things. So it was this first kind of World War II first-person shooter on the PlayStation 1 and 2. So it was kind of that era right there. Yeah. And so incredible opportunity I could not turn down. And that was an unbelievable experience for me. I think that's where I got to first sample the idea of not just being an artist and creating cool art and doing awesome things, but being able to branch out from there and really start to learn about game design in a much, much deeper way, because we were solving a lot of problems back then. There were very few first-person shooters on any console at that point in time. There was a famous James Bond game called GoldenEye that was on the GameCube, but this was a really early for first-person shooter, and so solving a lot of these new problems that had never really been solved. And how do you make that work on a console with a game controller? How do you push the level of the graphics on the PS2 to be as good as a PC? So I got bit by another bug there, which is like solving these really challenging, crazy problems that haven't been solved before. So great time at DreamWorks Interactive, which eventually got bought by Electronic Arts. So a couple of years there and moved into art directing. And then I got an opportunity to come up to Northern California, which I'd always loved, to work for Lucasfilm, LucasArts specifically. And forgot to mention, like, everything before college, probably the reason that I knew what I wanted to do and loved computer graphics was Star Wars and Indiana Jones and those IP, of course, like almost any kid my age, but maybe 20% more. Quite a geek on that stuff. So that opportunity, of course, could not turn down either. And so moved up to Northern California and worked for LucasArts for a decade. And I was able to work on not only a bunch of wonderful internal games and at LucasArts and be the art director on the Force Unleashed franchise, but I was also the external art director there for many years, which basically put me in touch with a whole bunch of other studios that Lucasfilm in general would use to make other games, so third-party developers. And that was an amazing experience that I didn't realize how important and impactful it was for me, but it was like being able to sample 10 different jobs and 10 different teams at any given time and see how they work and work there without having to job jump, right? I still got to experience that. And so many years there, and that's where the story starts to change into kind of where we are today. So I'll pause.
Yeah. Well, maybe before we get to that point, because I do want to go there next, but you in your role as an art director, as an example, I'm sure that you had to collaborate in many ways as you're trying to solve all of the problems that you need to solve, whether it's from a graphic standpoint, from a audio standpoint, from a I'm guessing that there's probably a bit of a scientific approach to game design in and of itself. Maybe just describe like literally all that goes into it and the complexity. Because I venture to guess that, you know, it's, at least I didn't have an appreciation for the level of complexity that it really takes to produce a game.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. And that, you know, that leads into my exhaustion comment earlier too, is that I found out the reason that I preferred working in games than in film was that complexity. It was the myriad of unsolved problems, right? Of seemingly impossible things to figure out. That just got me. Where film is wonderful, but it's passive, right? You can control every frame on the screen, exactly what it's going to look like. Whereas a game, it's it's got to look good from every angle, right? It's got to run on the processing speed that you're limited with. It's got to, I mean, there's just so many variables and so many things that have to all click together. So from a problem solving and a creative challenge point of view, I was completely kind of sold on the games industry once I got to sample that. But that comes at a cost. And I think anyone that knows anything about the games industry knows it's famous for crunch, like real crunch. And so a lot of that time, was spent in the studio. A lot of my chunk of my life there, and I wouldn't trade any of it for anything. But diving into that passion, following unsolved problems, you got to know that oftentimes comes with a significant cost in just the contribution that you have to put into it to make it all happen. And so wonderful growth years, but incredible hours. And but the beautiful thing is that everybody that was in that industry is equally passionate about doing the same thing. And you all just want to make the best thing you can possibly make together. And the joy of that collaboration, the creative problem solving that happens, that whole journey of the idea for a game to sometimes 4 years later finishing it, right? And finally getting it off the press is, an emotional roller coaster that is hard for me to describe, but wonderful.
Awesome. So maybe from out of the frying pan into the fire, you made the choice to start a healthcare company and frankly merge two industries, merge the gaming industry with healthcare, which I think is even by today's standards is a pretty novel not only idea, because I think you're well beyond an idea, but there's a set of companies that are doing it, but certainly in 2011 I just can't imagine like what that conversation might have been like as you were talking either with your colleagues, your friends, or eventually investors. But maybe talk about why Akili Health, why the transition into healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So if I had kind of going back, if I had kind of a subtopic hobby, it was the brain. I've always been interested in that, along with art. And as I started to get involved in game development, and per your last question, the other thing that I really discovered is there's so much psychology in art, in both art and in game design, right? Mm-hmm. I realized very quickly that really good game designers they're basically like psychologists, right? They're thinking about motivation. They're understanding deeply reward and challenge and the payoff and the balance between those things. And because amazing games are exactly that. They're a perfect balance of challenge and achieving that challenge and being rewarded for that challenge. And so my kind of underlying passion for brain, and I just read constantly about the brain growing up, just blown away, because I think we didn't know anything about it. That's probably what attracted me to it, right? Is another one of these alternate paths or unsolved problems. And so I think it was about 2009 or 10, maybe even earlier. I met Dr. Adam Ghazali, who's one of our co-founders, and he is this incredibly well-respected rock star neuroscientist today, even was back then. I met him socially initially, and it was at a party in Berkeley. I remember this. And once I met him, he was a major gamer. I had this major interest in the brain. We immediately started to pick each other's brains, and I was like, take me to UCSF, scan my brain. And he's like, take me to LucasArts and show me how games are made. And so we immediately started to half seriously, talk about the convergence of these ideas. And at the time, there were quite a few neuroscientists looking at off-the-shelf video games already and really studying them and doing brain imaging with them. Dr. Daphne Bavelier, who's one of our advisors too, is one of the most highly respected and amazing neuroscientists in this space. And she was oddly enough looking at Medal of Honor at the time. You know, I'd long since worked on it, but that's one of the games that she was using to study. And seeing for the first time what I think many game designers and artists had suspected is that games are actually really powerful and can be very good for you if designed so, right? And so the idea that games aren't totally evil and this Satan's instrument, which I've heard some people say before, really, like, that just clicked with me right away. I'm like, wow, I can use these powers to not only help remove the stigma that's always bugged me about interactive entertainment, but actually use these superpowers for good and improve people's lives. So at that time, I started working with Dr. Ghazali at UCSF on nights and weekends. I was at LucasArts at the time. And I brought over some incredible people from LucasArts, Dimitri Ellingson, a great artist and art director, Noah Falstein, who is just a legend in the game industry, Eric Johnston, one of the most incredible engineers and inventors that I've ever met in my entire life. And Dr. Ghazali fed us beer and sushi, at nights and weekends. And we built the very first early prototype of what eventually became the technology that founded our ADHD product at Akili. And we developed this very game-like thing. I'm reluctant to call it quite a game, but it was this car driving down the road called NeuroRacer. And Dr. Ghazali's team put this into a study that was just incredible. It ended up landing on the cover of Nature, which I didn't appreciate, but that is apparently that's like getting an Academy Award for neuroscience, getting the cover of Nature. But this study was wonderful. It showed two things. It showed, one, that a video game could be sensitive enough to detect the differences and the cognitive ability between individuals, right? It could essentially assess people to a really fine degree. And it showed, because he measured a whole bunch of people in their 20s, 30s, all the way up to 90s. And it showed the curve that we all suspected, is that we cognitive decline as we get older. Started earlier than we thought. I think it was like 27 or something like that, which was a surprise finding. But a video game it was sensitive enough to detect these differences between people's cognition. Huge deal, right? And B, it could actually train. It could actually train and improve that. It could change that curve for people. In some cases in their 80s, they could start to perform like people in their 20s on certain cognitive tasks after playing for only a month of this game. So if I wasn't hooked then, I was very hooked at this point, like before that. And so well before the Nature paper came out, it was really clear that this is what I wanted to do, and that there was clearly an opportunity here to help patients and to create something entirely new. And that's kind of where another chapter starts. So a good place for me to pause too and see if there's more questions on that part of the journey.
Yeah, well, maybe before we get to the sort of next chapter, if you will, there's, these things take time, and ultimately, we'll get to where you're at today, but they take time. And I think part of what entrepreneurs struggle with sometimes is, when we always talk about failing fast. We talk about experimentation and A/B testing, and all those things are great. But at some point, you have decisions to make. There's forks in the road. And sometimes, you're frankly just not sure what the right answer is. And do you keep going, or do you shut it down? And sometimes it's as broad as, the company level, do you keep going or shut it down? And sometimes it's small from maybe a feature or product standpoint. Maybe as you're going through the early stages of Akili, just describe that, because I think it's easy to say and talk about, but it's hard to sort of execute. And I just love to hear your perspective on it.
Sure. Yeah, I think what's deeply embedded in your question, and I appreciate, is this unknown, right? This unpaved crossroads or unpaved fork in the road where you're like, no one's really trodden this path before. What do you do, right? You could spend all day being data centric. Data is wonderful, right? But you could go down a rabbit hole forever trying to collect data to answer your question of which path should I take, right? Or you can just be crazy and willy-nilly and just jump off this, you don't want to do either, right? It's got to be that sweet spot mix, and every problem's a little bit different. One of the things that, I'm learning so much in this kind of new industry, even though I've been involved in Akili for 8 years, like every day I'm learning so much. But one of the biggest things that shouldn't surprise me anymore, is it's the people and the way they think that you collect around you that help make those decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing we've seen at Akili Learn, right, is that when you're doing something, or you establish a company, or seeking a goal that really hasn't been solved before, the worst thing you can do is just apply the way you used to do other stuff to it and say that's going to be the right decision. Like, you have to be really open-minded and really creative. Whether you're an artist or a scientist, creativity is the same thing. And you have to surround yourself and bring in people who by default just think out of the box that way, right? And they look at a problem that hasn't been solved, and instead of trying to push some other way they've done it into solving that problem, they're really open-minded and have a collaborative discussion. I'm like, okay, well, how can we do this? It's going to be a great combination of data, and it's going to be a great combination of some of our relevant experience that we've had collectively, and some of it's going to be that kind of gut, and that instinct, and be not scared of failing, right? And be, the cliche, but be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a former a colleague and a mentor say that surrounding yourself with really bright, non-like-minded people and having ferocious debates among friends is the best way to get to the best outcome. And I think that's effectively what you just described.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and that's so well said. I love that. And you're right. It's the entire spirit of diversity, and by every measure, diversity in every measure, right? And it's that it's the diverse experience, diverse thinking, diverse everything. That power is so incredible. And when we founded the company, that was one of the very first things that we both recognized and embraced, was that we were trying to combine these two extremely different industries. And with that would come great power and great challenge, right? Where you've got people that think completely differently, come from different worlds. And I'm thankful that we recognized that early and just said, okay, well, let's lean into the amazing of that, and let's invest in that and enhancing that. And let's not try to just combat it or fight it. And so I've seen other companies try to combat it and fight it, or work around it, or just surround themselves by people that are just similar and comfortable, and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. We talk a lot about creating space around the problem set, such that you assume that no one has the answer, and if you come in there and assume that, then you're also coming at it from hopefully the right perspective. So awesome. Well, maybe so you're now you've proven the concept. You've whether it was a quote unquote proof of concept or not, you've proven that there's clear clinical value. There's clear value in the capability that you had developed so early on. So now it's a matter of, well, what's next? How do you actually go to market? How do you think about the series of things? How do you think about funding? There's all these things that you need to start thinking about. What do the next sort of chapters start to look like after you prove the concept?
Yeah. So very exciting and nerve-wracking time, of course. Like, wow, we have this amazing technology and this amazing promise of an entirely new industry, an entirely new way to learn about cognition and treat the brain. And so no shortage of passion, right? But then what do you do? How do you get there? The very first, I remember Dr. Ghazali had called me at one point and he said, hey, I was reached out by this VC. We should talk to him. And we had a phone call. And I remember being really turned off because it was almost like a Hollywood script version of a VC. It was just, you could tell dollar signs in the eyes, and it just felt icky. It just felt like not right. And so I remember being kind of like, oh man, is this what this is going to be like? But very shortly after that, Adam called me and said, I want you to meet this guy I met named Dr. Eddie Martucci. And Eddie, who is now our CEO and one of our 4 co-founders, incredible individual by so many measures. But so Eddie was at the time working with a group called PeerTech in Boston, which is kind of a seed and investment and kind of healthcare general. They're an unusual, really cool model, but they effectively ended up being our kind of incubator and seed investor, and still one of our largest investors. They're amazing. Anyway, so Eddie was with PeerTech, and he had met Ghazali, and they had talked, and Eddie had already come, before even seeing one of Ghazali's talks or seeing the nature, Eddie had already kind of had a vision for this concept, right? Of combining these industries and knowing that medicine didn't have to be scary, that medicine could actually be smooth and accessible, and in some cases even fun, right? So Eddie was already there with a vision. But I do remember when Adam told me, like, talk to Eddie Martucci from the East, I'm like, oh no, not another one. No, this is going to be terrible. But Eddie flew out to San Francisco, and he and I had, I don't know, it was probably a 4-hour lunch. It ended up being in Sausalito, and I heard his vision for this, which filled a huge gap in what Ghazali and I, we just had a cool tech that we were excited about. We had something that we saw, an industry, we saw patients being helped, but we didn't have the business, model kind of in mind, whereas Eddie did. So immediately, like, we knew Eddie was the right guy. PureTech was the right guy. And so at that exact moment too, we brought in our fourth co-founder, a gentleman named Adam Piper, who is one of the best designer, engineer, just incredible human being that I've ever worked with. And he immediately was super happy. He knew Ghazali as well. He jumped in as our fourth co-founder. And between PureTech and Eddie, that's how we got really our first stage and our first foothold to start the company.
Wow, amazing. I mean, it's just sort of reiterates the point of finding people that are passionate but not like-minded, with capability and vision that, you may start out as being different, but the more you talk, the more you sort of work through it, the more you shape it, as we like to say, it turns into something that you yourself could not have done, right? I would imagine. So great to hear. So now you have some capital. You're trying to make the decision on what to do next. You clearly, if we sped forward to today, you've had a very successful launch of an FDA-approved digital therapeutic, which I want to talk to you. But before sort of jumping to that, I'll just maybe talk a little bit more about the journey, because there's a lot more to it than just sort of seed stage to now. I think what you're on is a Series D raise in terms of funding. Maybe talk about what happened between that point and now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the first step for us was to build a great core team, in the range of, I think, like 10 to 15 people is kind of where we initially and kind of stuck there until we had some stuff answered. But an amazing mix, right, of scientists, data analytics folks, healthcare, biotech, pharma in some case, game design, film design, production, product management. So like this great, cool, diverse, group of different people from these different industries. And we immediately, knowing what we were trying to do, got to work learning about each other, right? That was number one. We recognized we had to build a culture. We had to establish a culture, and it had to be different than anything any of us had ever seen. We had to, as deeply as possible, understand each other's silos and each other's worlds as best we possibly could. Because recognizing that once we grew the company beyond that, it was that core group's responsibility to maintain that communication and that culture and try to avoid or cut off at the pass any butting of the heads, because like, I don't understand what you do and I don't understand what you do. We felt if we got it right early on, we could get the right trajectory so that when we started to grow the company a little bit, we could help avoid some of these problems. And I think we were quite successful with that. Not perfect by any stretch. We brought in many advisors, one of whom which I'd worked with in the past, who was the president of DreamWorks Interactive at the time, Glenn Entis, who is an incredible cultural force and a very experienced, very creative, very intelligent man, who also has a wonderful understanding of team and culture and dynamic. And so I give a lot of credit to him to helping us organize at that point early. Yeah. So it was really that pulling together that collection of diverse experience, learning about one another, and then saying, who are we going to help first, right? Because this is one of the strangest things about how this started, is the technology that came out of UCSF is such that it is actually core to many, many different disease populations. Mm-hmm. It's really truly changing the neural network of the brain at the very kind of bottom of the funnel here, right? So unlike a drug where it may be masking a symptom for ADHD or depression along those lines, it's actually changing the neural network of the brain underneath, right? And so it spanned a lot of populations. So we actually started a lot of early feasibility and pilot trials in different populations. We kind of knew ADHD was probably the right place to start for a variety of reasons. But we started to run trials and invest in those trials right away, which was great, because we knew that when we founded the company, we had to do two things right. We had two pillars that had to be critical. One was scientific validation and rigor, right? We knew that everything that we were doing needed to be unassailably valid. And like, we knew this was real medicine, and we did not want this to be confused with like the brain training industry or anything along, but like, this is very different. This was real stuff. And then the second pillar was really the quality of the experience, right? It was the engagement. It was the fun factor. We knew that in order to create lasting change in the brain, we know this from the neuroscience, it's experiences that make those changes, right? So sometimes those experiences are bad in the case of PTSD. Sometimes they're a great experience, your first kiss or whatever, but that I guarantee that changed your neural network, right? And so we know we knew back then that it was experiences that changed the brain. And we also knew that one of the best ways to create customized, personalized, potent experiences is video games. And so investing in those two parts of the company were the first things that we put into. So, building part of the company to be looking and feeling a little bit more like a game studio, and the other like a biotech or healthcare and science-based entity. And so yeah, great place to pause. But those were the first like major things that we kind of bit off and chewed and said, let's get those things right. And I think we did a pretty good job there.
Yeah. I mean, I think culture is it's easy to say the word, and it's sometimes harder to describe. And personally, what I found is being intentional about defining who you are as a company, who you are as individuals, especially early stage, is sort of critical as you think about growth and ultimately scalability, assuming success. But how did you know? Like how did you know that was a place to start? Because maybe everyone knows. I certainly in my early days of being an entrepreneur, I didn't know. I have a much different perspective on it now. But how did you know that was a place you needed to really start and spend time?
Sure. From my perspective, I can say I learned that in the games industry because of that crunch and everything that I talked about earlier. What I saw happened in the games industry is it was the really great cultures, meaning collaborative, great communication, passion that was like self-fueling between everyone. That's where great product came out of, and that's where good experiences came out of. Those are the games that did well, and those are the teams that stuck together and did even greater things. And so I just saw that pattern. I saw the importance of culture, especially in the face of craziness, right? You're in the trenches with people, right? You're down like Tales from the Trenches, right? You're in there, and like these become your band of brothers and sisters. And that became really evident to me early in my career in the games industry. And I think that is more common, I think, in the entertainment industry in general, probably for a lot of the same reasons than you might always see in pharma, for example. Not picking on it, there's different culture. So I think from my point of view, that's where I kind of brought part of this to the table. I think then also the second part of the answer is our recognition of this mashup that we were about to do. And just knowing what we don't know about this mashup and saying, okay, well, if that's going to work and be powerful, what's the most critical piece we have to get right? And the answer was communication, right? And then if you kind of peel apart what communication means, I mean, any of us, right? You look at any problem you've probably had at work or even in personal life, if you really back it all up, it's probably a communication thing. And so we just recognize that, like, all right, it's all about communication, and communication essentially is culture, right? And so I think there was a few of us that just came from different angles and recognized early that there was the possible failure point for us if we didn't invest in that early. And I think it would have been, honestly, had we not.
Yeah, totally. So well said. We have a number of questions rolling in, and I want to get to one that I think is pretty relevant to what we're talking about here. One of the questions is how did you actually conclude that focusing on, at least as an initial focus, focusing on ADHD in the younger population was the right place to start?
Sure. There's quite a long list of why ADHD is first for us, and I want to be like super clear. And we could hopefully we can talk about this too, but our pipeline and what we have kind of set up is, what we are as a company is to really help as many people in the world as we possibly can with cognitive impairment and issues across so many diseases. ADHD is kind of our beachhead in our first product, pediatric ADHD specifically. So that's really where we're refining the business model. We're kind of getting that out. So it's really kind of the beachhead to open this up. But some of the reasons on this giant list for ADHD, one is that the current solutions that are available for treating ADHD, because ADHD is such a still ill-defined area, right? There's so many different parts of it. I think it's starting to look more like what we discovered with autism, right? There's a spectrum. There's all kinds of stuff within ADHD. And realizing that a lot of the treatments or things that are available to help ADHD are not meeting the need, right? I mean, drugs work fine for some people. We're not like the anti-drug, take down the drug company. They work great for hyperactivity and some of these other things. Cognitive behavioral therapy seems to have some effect. It's hard to measure, but it's pretty time consuming and hard to kind of pull off. So when we really looked at and talked to the patients and these parents and caregivers on, are their needs really being met? The answer was no, right? And so number one was that unmet need. And two is we realized that the technology that we had, where its superpower is for attention specifically, right? That's exactly the part of the brain that we're strengthening and enhancing and building up that skill. And all the trials that we ran, I think to date, we've run over 30 clinical trials at Akili, which is crazy cool. And, attention, we just continue to knock out of the park. It's something across diseases. It's something that we're really powerful tool for. And knowing that attention is partly maybe an misunderstood part of ADHD, or like its impact, right? People like remember the hyperactive moments. They remember, oh, my kid was just being terrible the other day, like he threw a chair, that's kind of what sticks in a caregiver's mind when the doctor says, how's Tommy doing? But really, attention is a huge kind of subset of this population, and it's kind of core to a lot of these other things. So recognizing that our technology was super powerful for attention, and that is obviously attention deficit, right? Was a great place to go. And then you add in kids, right? And if we're introducing the world to the first, FDA approved prescription video game, you can imagine back in our Series A and Series B funding, like we got some eyebrows raised at the like, you're gonna do what? We don't have that anymore, which is really cool. But obvious fit from that point of view, right? Especially ADHD kids, like getting them to sit still and engage with something is really hard. Like the goal is to get them to be able to listen in school and be able to do, follow through on the tasks that they need to do to be successful in life. And one of the things that many ADHD kids will do and sit and engage with is a game, right? So there's a much longer list, but there's two: the unmet need and I think the obvious fit from our market research and talking to kids and what they want and how they interact and how they engage with experiences. It was the right population to help first.
Yeah, so it's really fascinating and so well said. It makes so much sense as you described it. Maybe one of the questions that we had come in is, at some point you had to make the decision to go down the FDA approval path, and you had mentioned that you had some eyebrows raised earlier in the company's history when no one had done that before. I think no one still has done that besides Akili. Describe maybe how and why you made the decision to go down that path, and then maybe we'll get into what that exactly looked like in terms of the process.
Sure. So again, a lot of reasons, and yeah, we got questioned on that early on. Like, why would you do that? Why go up that scary, hard mountain, right? When you could just like give this to people. And the main reasons, one was kind of what I alluded to before, is that first pillar of our company. Like we see and saw that there's a future of medicine where people take their cognitive health as seriously as they do their physical health, right? We know this is true. We know that future needs to come. You see how much every day that goes by, we see what a struggle this is becoming evident in the world, right? Cognition is huge. And so we knew in order to do that, this had to be legitimate, crystal clear, like unassailable medicine. This was an industry, not a product, not a series of products, that it was, helping legitimize what isn't even called digital therapeutics back then, right? I mean, there were lots of terms being thrown around, but there wasn't a name for it. We didn't have a name for it, but we knew that this was important and really real, and that we had to kind of set a high bar, not as a competitive barrier or anything like that, but just for the good of patients and the good of the industry and the good of the world, right? Mm-hmm. So going the FDA path, going the prescribed path, like that was kind of one of the meta reasons, right, to do it. Mm-hmm. And then there were a lot of other logistical reasons. we knew from market research, we knew, and we know this to date from our data coming in from the real world too, is when a caregiver and a patient is interacting with a physician, their compliance, their engagement, their trust is much, much, much higher, right? So they're much more likely to take their medicine, for lack of a better term, right? And to get better if a physician is part of the process here. And so that wasn't even really as much of a hypothesis as something that we knew was true, but we really thought we could scale and make a big difference here. And yeah, I mean, I would say those are the two really primary shining reasons that the FDA path is really just validation scientifically from a legitimacy point of view, and making sure that a physician was involved. And we feel like if we can get this right and get digital medicine, digital therapeutics defined right, and work with the Digital Therapeutics Alliance and the world and try to get this new category really nailed and clear and understood as real medicine, then I think we can probably start to do some non-prescription stuff, right? But we felt like it was really important to kind of punch a giant hole through this barrier, right? If we're going to do it, like, go. And yeah, it was expensive and took a long time, but we knew that was going to be the case.
Yeah, amazing. Such a great perspective. I do want to get to your sort of next set of digital therapeutics, because as we've talked and as you've mentioned, you're not just an ADHD sort of focused entity, and you have this very sort of broad vision, which is just so compelling. And I feel like I could spend the next 3 hours just talking with you about it, but we only have about 10 minutes. So maybe as it relates to one more ADHD question, then we'll go to the sort of broader question. As it relates to the therapy itself, just maybe to go through the process of FDA, I'm sure it was incredibly challenging, but then to actually do the design of how it works, and then to prove that it has results. Obviously, you've done that, but maybe talk a little bit more specifically, like what does it do? How does it work in terms of a digital therapeutic for in this case a child with ADHD?
Sure. So yeah, in the case of EndeavorRx, which is the ADHD product, which will be available via prescription very, very soon. I can say that. I can't say a date yet. It's at the core, kind of from a scientific point of view, and again, caveat, even though I've been in this world now for a decade, I'm nowhere near a neuroscientist. But what's essentially happening in the simplest level is as a patient engages with this product, it's played on an iPad or an iPhone, device, and they're doing a few different things. One is there's a continuous motor task that they have to be engaging in. In this case, it's tilting the iPad to steer their avatar, their character through these crazy worlds, right? And they're having to do this in an unpredictable way from the brain's point of view. So it can't be a race course where you can remember there's a left turn coming up, right? It's completely random because it's activating a certain part of the brain that's making you do this kind of continual unpredictable motor task, right? So that's occurring. And while that's occurring, the patient is being presented with challenges and targets and stimuli that's coming at them. And they've been taught and told which stimuli to react to, which stimuli not to react to, and that's constantly changing and adapting and evolving. But at the most basic form, those are kind of the two things that are happening. Part of the magic is the happening at the same time. There's a video, if I had time, I would love to show you, that we've had for years, where we have two side-by-side playback of the game being played. One is a neurotypical 11-year-old kid, and the other is one of the patients with ADHD, 11-year-old, right? Matched in pretty much every way. And you're watching them play the game, and it's hard to tell really the difference when you're watching just the fun part of the game. But then we overlay the data of how they're doing at these individual tasks. And it becomes really clear what the ADHD child is struggling with they're having to do these major trade-offs between having to do this and having to attend to these stimuli that are coming in. And there's this huge gap. They can't really anywhere near as well as a neurotypical do them both at the same time at a high level. Reaction times are lower. There's a ton of stuff happening there. And what the game does eventually is it assesses your abilities. It assesses kind of your strengths and what you're able to do as an individual cognitively. And then what's really cool is it builds all the rewards for the rest of the game on the fly for you, right? So they're perfectly timed and positioned out to push you to the level of effectively brain plasticity, right? Where you're actually going to change. And so it makes a custom version of the game. So everyone that plays the game has a different experience, which is pretty awesome. And it's like each one gets a different personal trainer, right? They know where you got to rip the muscle, and they're going to keep you right on the edge so that you're constantly growing it. And so the game is designing and doling out rewards as you achieve and chip away, and as you slowly start to remove that cost that you have as you're resolving and conflicting with these different tasks that you're meant to try to be able to do or should be able to do more cohesively together. And so over time, that curve just starts to look like a neurotypical kid. And we see in the objective cognitive measures of inattention go away in a third of these kids. They look like a neurotypical in our studies. So pretty amazing. And that being said, all these great trials, where we're most excited is now we get to do the best trial of all, which is the giant real world data collection of this, where we know it's going to help patients today, but we also know it's going to get better. It's going to get even more efficacious. It's going to get even more engaging, and it's going to happen rapidly. To your point, Mike, right? Being a tech company, we can iterate so quick, and we can improve both the efficacy and the product at a rate that you could never do with a pharmaceutical.
Wow, amazing! Oh my gosh. Thank you for going into that detail. It was incredibly fascinating. Again, maybe in the last 5 minutes, maybe just a few more questions. I do want to get to the one that we started talking about. This is with this launch. It's not that you've arrived. Maybe you've arrived at your first place that you're going to be, but you have a much broader vision. As you mentioned, you started to mention, you want to create and define the space of digital therapeutics. Which is audacious, but I, as someone who sort of has a very grand way of thinking in general, I love. So maybe describe how you're thinking about the future of Akili a little bit as it relates to digital therapeutics.
Sure. I can kind of recite I guess what other companies would call their vision statement. Ours is just called our purpose, because it's the way we think about it. It's like, why are we even here, right? And it's to ignite new hope for those living with cognitive impairment and boldly challenge the status quo of medicine, which is like my favorite part, right? And so there's this ultimate goal to, as we said, help catalyze the recognition of cognition across the world, and then help treat it in any way that we possibly can. So we won't always make just video games that treat cognition, right? We're probably going to do all kinds of stuff. Even with the prescription to EndeavorRx, for example, you don't just get the digital treatment, you're getting an entire kind of care management package that sits alongside and supports that, right? Which is great, with behavior tracking and symptom tracking apps for the parent and teacher. So we're really, as a company, trying to use technology to help with cognition in any way we can and help push that world forward, right? That create that future. And so we, of course, past ADHD, we've run trials in a lot of different disease populations and have ongoing trials, and we'll continue to do that for probably forever. But areas that we've already have data in and we're very excited about are MDD, so major depressive disorder. We have MS, believe it or not, actually really crazy. It's like notable cognitive impairment and decline with MS, in addition to the physical issues that are happening there. Anxiety, autism. We've run kind of like monitoring / diagnostic stuff for Alzheimer's and dementia. We think, mild cognitive impairment, which is essentially what that Nature paper was looking at, right? Was just general decline as we age. We think there's a huge group of people that we can help there. And the list goes on into things like lupus and chemo fog, and areas where cognition is impacting daily lives and how people behave and how they can function in life, but also impacting the physical down the road, right? We think a lot of insurers and the smart ones, right, are thinking about cognition already now as this almost preventative medicine. Yeah. So I think that world's happening, and so we're just trying to catalyze it, and we're trying to push it really for the good of the patient.
Awesome. So I have two more questions, and I know we just have 3 minutes left. So maybe knowing that you're defining a space, knowing that you've been at this for, like you've said, almost a decade, you're going through a Series D in terms of your funding. You have to find, I assume, investors that have that help you shape the vision and refine the vision. But on some level, I'm guessing that that needs to come up with some level of patience as well. So and maybe talk a little bit about how do you find the right investor? Like what's the criteria if there is a criteria from your perspective?
No, it's a great question. I think we feel very fortunate to be in a position where we can be more strategic about the kind of investor that we're working with, right? Because there's a lot of, I've heard it called dumb money before, right? Like there's like, you can go get money, right? We're really, and have been most of the time along the way here, really been lucky to be able to partner with investors who are not only incredibly patient, right? Because they see the long play here, but who are strategic and able to help us. And not just through the classic networking, that's always great, right? But partners that are big vision thinkers and strategic thinkers, and can help make connections for us that we wouldn't be able to make ourselves, but really help us do things like pick disease populations to go study. And so we really are fortunate because we've been able to partner and bring in really super smart money. And money that people see that long-term vision. And it's been interesting for me coming from the tech side, my background, where it's this super fast pace, like, okay, turn around, or expecting profit in 1 year, right? Or revenues in 1 year. And then I've seen the other side, which is kind of big pharma, right? Where it's like 10 years and $1 billion to develop a drug. And then you basically just pump $250 million into marketing and toss it over the fence and cross your fingers, right? Like that's such a different business model, right? Than the iterative kind of tech side of things. And so on one side of when we talk about patience, it's very relative, patience as in waiting, right?
Right.
And so we've got this nice mix, and continue to try to find that nice mix and make sure that our board is composed really of, again, really diverse mindset from these different industries. So yeah, if we continue to be fortunate and continue to like it, we just continue to partner with smart money and strategic money to help us achieve our goals.
Great. Okay, so last question. I know we're at the top of the hour. My guess is your digital therapeutic is going to see tremendous success. One of the things that's really interesting, and that I realized early on in our conversations, was the power of the technology as it relates to creating a different outcome from a clinical perspective, and how fast you can iterate on the tech versus a drug. You made that point earlier. So I don't think the limiting factor is going to be, quote unquote, how fast can you produce, quote unquote, the technology here. But like, how are you thinking about managing demand, or how are you thinking about quote unquote rolling out the digital therapeutic as it relates to ADHD?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think it's an important point. The short answer is way more like a technology company and not like a pharmaceutical. Yeah. We have this opportunity to roll this out in the way that we are rolling out is actually pretty quietly first, right? Even though we're FDA cleared, this can be prescribed, and the product has been in development for a long time. It's quite robust. It's great. We recognize that it's not just about the product. It's the entire patient journey. It's the onboarding. It's every touch point. And this is a new kind of medicine, right? So we hopefully are smart enough to recognize that some stuff's probably going to break. Like, we're probably not going to get it perfectly right the first time around. The good news is that it's text, and we can iterate and change and learn and adapt really quickly. So when we got the FDA clearance, like the attention and the press that hit was way beyond what we ever imagined, for better or for worse. And that's great. But we have a massive list of people who have basically said, join the waiting, like we're ready for this, like physicians and caregivers, patients. And so we really want to kind of cater to that group first, and frankly, work out some of the little kinks that we're sure are going to happen. Right now, on paper, we don't see any. It's going to be fine. No, we're not. We want to take this opportunity of being a technology product to use the philosophy of more product market fit, right? We will go that curve goes a little lower and a little slower first, where we work out the kinks and we test things. And like you said, we A/B test, we try different things. We get feedback from our patients and our caregivers and teachers and doctors. And we make it better and better until we've hit these KPIs that we've all agreed is truly product market fit, where everything is dialed in.
Yeah.
And that point, then we kind of put fuel on the fire, for lack of a better term, and get this to as many patients as humanly possible and help as many people as we can. So we feel like we actually owe it to the patient to get it right carefully first before we just do the big giant pharma launch. Does that answer your question?
It does. It's so awesome. And I know we're past time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time here. I know I didn't get to all the questions. There were a bunch of great questions that came in. Matt, I want to thank you. It's been tremendous to spend the last hour with you. I learned a ton. I hope I know the audience did as well. And I'm gonna be rooting for Akili Interactive on the sidelines. And I look forward to seeing tons of success your way going forward. So thanks for the time today, Matt.
Thanks so much, Mike. And thanks to everyone for letting me ramble. I can talk about this stuff all day and I love it. So yeah, this has been wonderful.
All right. Thanks all. Take care. Have a great day. Bye now.